Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Brew Pub. I'm your host, Michael Camp. Today, I'm excited to have Kathy Shihadah back with us again. Kathy, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. Kathy is a writer, editor, researcher at If Americans Knew, which is a great media organization focused on the Middle East. She's also a blogger at Patheos with the title Grace Colored Glasses. That's a great blog. And moreover, she has close family living in Gaza and at least one family member who has fled Gaza. She has a well-researched and personal perspective on what's going on in the war over there. So, Kathy, we're looking forward to hearing your perspective on what's going on, particularly with the Gaza ceasefire, as because it was supposed to go into phase 2, I think, over this past weekend here in early March. But there's so much of this that, when you read the news, it can make your head spin and wonder what's going on. So I'm glad to have you on to help us sort through a lot of this stuff, since a lot of there's just a lot of plain misinformation sometimes that you hear in the media. So we know that the ceasefire deal was supposed to be into phase 2 this last weekend, but apparently it's hanging by a thread. What's happening now?
Yeah, so the first phase of the ceasefire was supposed to be 42 days, 6 weeks.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And during that time, a number of Israeli hostages were supposed to be released. And for each hostage that was released, a whole bunch of Palestinian prisoners were supposed to be released. And I just want to insert real quickly, we don't like to call them Palestinian prisoners. We like to call them hostages as well, because a lot of the Palestinians that have been in prison were just taken off of the street or kidnapped and have never been charged with anything at all. So we consider them to be hostages, just pretty much just as much as the Israelis.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So yeah, we had 42 days during which there were a number of hostage exchanges, and also the fighting stopped. Israel was supposed to have a ceasefire. I mean, Hamas was supposed to have a ceasefire too, of course. And that was all supposed to stop, and there was supposed to be a giant rush of humanitarian aid going into Gaza, something like 600 truckloads of aid every day, of which 50 of those were supposed to be fuel, so that they could run all their water purification systems and their sewage systems, and the hospitals could have power they need to do their work and things like that. So the hostage exchanges pretty much took place pretty much on time. There were a few glitches. Israel refused to release a huge number of them for a few days because they were complaining about something really minute. But also Israel has killed, I want to say 132 Palestinians in Gaza during the ceasefire.
During the ceasefire. What kind of conditions was that?
I mean, Israel usually had an explanation for it. They said, oh, well, there were some people coming toward our soldiers and they were threatening. So we had to neutralize them. We couldn't try to get them to stop. We couldn't shoot them in the foot or warn them or anything. They had to shoot to kill.
Right.
So, there were also situations, and so there are Israeli soldiers in a couple of places in Gaza, and they have said, don't come close to these areas, because if you do, we'll consider you a threat. So I don't know, maybe there were some people who actually wanted to come and attack, but more likely there were people just trying to get home to the north, and they wandered a little too far or something like that.
Yeah, right.
But anyways, so that's a ceasefire, 132 dead. Hamas killed nobody. There was one, I want to say it was an Israeli who was killed in Gaza during the ceasefire, but he was killed by another Israeli.
Oh, really? Friendly fire. Okay.
Friendly fire, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, so Hamas has been abiding by its obligations under the ceasefire pretty meticulously. Israel has been blowing off everything. Hundreds and hundreds of violations have been documented. Hundreds. So we've got the 132 people killed. I don't remember how many injured. Way less aid has been allowed to go in than was supposed to. This is winter in Gaza. Like, I don't know, 80 or 90% of the homes have been destroyed. People are living in under the elements, and Israel was supposed to allow 60,000 temporary housing units and like 100,000 tents or something like that to come in so the people wouldn't have to live in the winter weather. They've only allowed 15, I think, temporary housing units like trailers, and about 10% of the total number of tents that they were
Oh,
supposed to.
wow. So
Yeah.
again, how many violations did you say were estimated by Israel?
I've read a number that's over 900.
Oh, wow. And who's making these determinations?
Well, this is the Gaza authorities
Okay.
that have been counting them.
Right. Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, when you hear about what's going on, none of these little details are shared. Oh, by the way, 132 Gazans were killed, and no Israelis were killed by Hamas or Gazans, and not all the aid was brought in that they said they were going to bring in, and
Yeah.
by a long shot. So
Yeah. But if you look at the news today, they're saying, well, Hamas is not agreeing to these new ceasefire ideas that have been pitched, even though Hamas signed the ceasefire agreement. And so did Israel, but Israel's not abiding by it.
yeah, well, that's what I don't understand. Okay, there was a ceasefire agreement with 3 phases, correct?
Right.
So we've gone through phase 1, and we're supposed to go into phase 2, and now Israel's coming back and saying, what, we don't want to do phase 2? We want to stay in phase 1? Is that what they're saying?
They're saying they want to extend phase 1 for another 40 days, I think.
Yeah.
And keep exchanging prisoners, particularly getting Israeli prisoners released. And then once all of the prisoners are released from Gaza, then we can take it from there. But once they're released, Hamas has no more cards. They have nothing
Okay,
left.
yeah, right. That's their leverage. So, but what is supposed to happen in phase 2? I mean, what is changing if in their proposal?
So phase 2 is supposed to be a permanent ceasefire.
Okay.
And Israel is supposed to completely withdraw from Gaza.
Okay.
Now, what they're saying is we have no intention of completely withdrawing from Gaza. And in fact, Netanyahu has been quoted as saying, as far as I'm concerned, there is no phase 2.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So they're supposed to completely withdraw from Gaza, and then the remaining hostages will be released. Is that it?
During phase 2, which I think is another 6 weeks or supposed to be, the rest of the hostages, including those that are dead,
Yeah.
would be returned.
Right.
And I'm not aware that Israel has released a number for how many Palestinian hostages are supposed to get released during that, but probably hundreds and hundreds.
But it sounds like the condition for releasing the rest of the hostages is Israel withdraw completely from Gaza. Is that correct?
I mean, it's supposed to go parallel.
Yeah,
Israel's supposed to be withdrawing while these
right.
exchanges are taking place, but Israel's not going to withdraw.
Right. So they basically reneged on the deal and then trying to come up with another one and
Mhm.
then claiming that Hamas is not is
Yeah.
being stubborn and not
Yeah.
uh, following the deal. But Israel's the one that changed the deal. Am I
Right.
seeing that correctly?
That's exactly right. And just to throw another layer on this, the deal that they signed in January to get this whole ceasefire thing going is basically the same one that Hamas agreed to on May 5th
Yeah,
last
that's
year.
right. Last year.
Yeah.
Right.
Something like 14,000 more people have been killed in Gaza
Wow.
since then.
Right. And so, yeah, well, why didn't that deal get signed back in May? What was the holdup back then?
So, Benjamin Netanyahu is under investigation, and he's actually in court right now on a number of corruption charges. And he wants to stay in power so that he can stay out of prison. And if if he agreed to a ceasefire, then some of his more right wing, I mean, more right wing than he is,
Right.
um,
There is?
ministers, yeah, way more right wing.
All
He
right.
is a butterfly. Um, some of his farther right wing ministers would pull out of the government and cause the whole government to collapse.
I see.
So and if the government collapses, they have to, I don't know, vote again, or I'm not sure exactly how that all happens, but it would not be a good situation for Netanyahu to be in, especially when he's on the hot seat with these corruption charges. So he just kept delaying and delaying. And I mean, when Trump got elected, he started rattling the chains and uh, made something happen somehow. But
So the
obviously,
right.
Netanyahu didn't really have his heart in the ceasefire agreement that he signed.
Yeah, so that's the other weird thing is that I know when Trump was elected, Netanyahu celebrated because, Trump has been very supportive, even more so than Biden Harris. Um, but then Trump at least did something to get him to move to a ceasefire. And so I guess
Mhm.
that's one good thing. But on the other hand, Trump has done some other and said some other things. Um, for example, making statements about driving out the Palestinians and the Gazans into other countries
Mhm.
and redeveloping Gaza under the control of, I don't know, US and Israel rather than Gazans. So
Mhm.
so I mean, this kind of double talk is very confusing. What was the reaction of Gazans when Trump made those statements?
Well, I mean, from what I've heard, and this is not like a broad consensus or anything like that, but from what I heard from the Palestinians that I know and from my family, is they're willing to take peace and justice from wherever they can get it. And if
Yeah,
that's Trump, that's fine, but they
right,
didn't really expect much from him. Um, And when he started talking about, well, we'll just send you away and you'll never come back and all that, they just said, no, that is not going to be happening,
right.
period. And Palestinians are very, very determined people. If you think of what they've been through their lives, they would have just stayed in their houses or what's left of their houses and let Israel or US or whoever demolish the houses on top of them rather than walk away in most cases, in many cases.
Yeah, so their position is to remain. Now,
Mhm.
some other Arab countries, I understand, have offered to help reconstruct Gaza, and I assume that's what the Gazans want, someone to come and help them reconstruct the damage.
Yeah, someone who's not going to take over and turn it into what they want.
Right. Right.
The
Someone like
Russians are
Trump
ready
who's
for
making, I mean, did you actually see that video that Trump posted on X?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I couldn't
Oh,
believe it. I thought it was a joke. I couldn't believe it. So I went on Trump's account and I started scrolling, thinking that this video had to be a joke. It's just like crazy. No, there it was. He had posted it. It
yeah.
had been already a week or two, and it was still there. And folks, if you haven't seen it, you could go see it on his X account, or you could Google it. But it's basically a video of like a promotional, as if it's a promotional video of of Trump taking over Gaza, a gold statue of Trump being installed in Gaza, Academy Award like gold things being sold in the market of Trump, and I don't know what, Trump and Netanyahu on the beach or something,
Yeah,
sipping
in
Mai Tais or
swimsuit.
something.
And don't forget the belly dancers.
Oh,
Just
the bearded belly dancers. I
yeah.
mean, just
Elon Musk eating hummus
yeah,
on the
yeah,
beach.
Elon Musk
Good
eating hummus.
grief.
I mean, just out really silly, stupid, sophomoric stuff. The president of the United States posting it on his X account, and oh, this is my plan, and actually basically saying that's he wanted to go in there and develop a Riviera type enclave in Gaza.
And let's not forget that it included ethnic cleansing. Nobody
Yeah,
seems willing to bring
yeah,
that
right,
to his
right,
face.
right,
Uh,
right. Yeah, drive the Gazans out. We'll fix everything. I think he might have said, "Okay, yeah, Gazans can come back, but we're in control." But it's like, wait a minute, whose country is this, or whose
yeah,
land is this, right?
yeah. Well, his story changed from day to day. First, it was, yeah, they can
Exactly.
come back, but they won't want to because it'll be so beautiful in the new place they're going to.
Oh, right.
And
Okay.
then it
Right.
was, nope, they can't come back.
Okay.
So,
So at the end, he said they can't come back. Right.
yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, he definitely he changes his statements uh, because they're not principled statements. He just comes out with something, and someone will say you can't say that, and so he'll back off a little bit. But
Mhm.
but the
Mhm.
main thing he's saying is still there.
Yeah.
So um, part of this part of the reason why we're friends and we talk about this is because this is the third time you've been on the podcast, and we've been tracking your family. You have family in Gaza, and I think some of them have thankfully gotten out, but why
Mhm.
don't you give us an update on how your family is doing there, what's going on?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So, one of our nephews, his name is Basil. He left Gaza about 2 years ago and went to Turkey as an asylum seeker. And he spent a few months there, and it was just the conditions are horrific for asylum seekers and for refugees. And he was working in a sweatshop and
Oh, I
making
see.
almost no money. And he said, this is no good. I can't do this. So we tried to talk him out of it, but he got himself onto one of those refugee boats,
Oh, really?
the
From
raft.
Turkey? Okay.
Yeah, he didn't tell us until after the fact because I
Okay.
think the whole family would have gone crazy. But,
Right.
he got to where did he got to Greece, and he spent a few months in Greece, and now he is in Belgium seeking asylum and, just kinda waiting things out to see what happens, but he started a GoFundMe, a few months back to try to raise money for, bringing his family out. And
Right.
yeah,
Right.
so
So
yeah.
So he went from Gaza to Turkey. How did he get from Gaza to Turkey? Just save some money for himself to get out?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
it's a short flight, I think. So he did that.
How do you
And
take a flight from Gaza?
oh, you don't take a flight from Gaza, actually, you have to get into Egypt.
Oh, you go from Egypt, right? You go
Yeah,
to Egypt, and then you go to Turkey, and then he went to Turkey, and that asylum process apparently was also long and drawn out, like it is in so many countries, and so he was languishing there, and then ended up in Belgium.
Right.
What do you think his prospects are of getting asylum in Belgium?
Well, they should be pretty good.
Okay.
He got to know a number of other Palestinian young men there in the refugee camp, and all of them have gotten approval for asylum and have left and gone on to seek their fortune. He's still there, and he's saying he's been speaking to someone who helps with asylum seekers, and this guy is saying, just be patient. You just have to let the system work, but you should be okay eventually.
Okay. All right.
So
So there's hope
that's
for him to get out, and then he's raising money for his family members to get out. Okay.
right. And that's been going okay. Some of his family members are not sure they want to go, or it varies from day to day. Some days you feel hopeful and optimistic, and other days you just can't see a future. So they're kind of going back and forth, some of them. Others are ready to go. They would rather go be with Basil than just get kicked out to some random place by Trump. So we have to kind of wait and see what's going to happen with that. But also,
Right. So it's kind of like, now the question would be, if it did happen that Trump's idea was scraped and scrapped, and the Arab countries did come in and start rebuilding Gaza, um, what would their position be then?
well, in that case, I think they would probably be willing to stay and see how things turn out.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, I think most people want to stay in their homeland if they can, if
Right.
if it's not a hostile place, um, and they would love to. And I mean, one of my nephews has said, "I wouldn't mind leaving for a while and seek, some adventure, but I would want to come back." But
Right.
it doesn't sound like, I mean, not even just under Trump, but under Netanyahu with Israel running the show, they don't tend to let Gazans go back home if they leave.
Yeah, that's what I heard. If they leave over since the occupation, right, they
Yeah,
don't they're not allowed to come back, right?
right. Yeah.
So yeah. So okay, so I mean that the people have to understand that this kind of um like, I don't know, limbo that they're in has been going on for decades. I mean, the place has been bombed before,
Mhm.
and several times, and people are just, there's no real solid, hope that things are going to turn out right. They just don't know. Everything is up in the air, and it's been up in the air for decades.
Yeah.
So you can see how they have, very hard decisions to make about, should we stay, should we try to go, but if you go, you won't be able to come back, and those kinds of
Mhm.
things.
Yeah,
Right.
it's really a catch-22 for everybody.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
It sounds like it. Right. Okay. So, one of the other things that I think people aren't realizing is that when all this stuff going on in Gaza with the war and the bombing, and now a ceasefire, but there's been other things. Well, actually, you know what? Before I go there, I was gonna ask you a question about the West Bank, but before we get to that, I
mhm,
did want to go right back. I wanted to go back to what we had talked about with why Netanyahu didn't do the deal back in May. And the question is, you know, sometime soon after October 7th, I forgot when it was, when the first hostages were released, and
mhm.
you probably remember the month. I don't remember the month, but it was, you know, within a couple months, wasn't it, of
Yeah.
October 7th, the first
Yeah.
hostages were released.
Yeah.
And what many of us could not understand was, wait a minute, they just came to a deal and released the hostages and released some Palestinian prisoners or hostages, right? Because many of them, most of them, from what I read, most of them are not even held under charge. They're just thrown in jail, right?
Mhm.
And not told why they're there. So, although there are some criminals,
Right.
most of them aren't, right?
Right.
So, why didn't they go to continue to do exchanges way back then. It just all of a sudden it just ended.
I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu from the beginning of the war had this goal that he was going to eradicate Hamas. And
Right.
so he was willing to do some prisoner exchanges, but then he wanted to get back to the killing Hamas. I mean, that was his official thing. A lot of us look at it and say, you wanted to kill the Gazans. You wanted to wipe out as many Gazans as you wanted, as you could, regardless of whether they were Hamas or not, because that's the reality of what happened. And you didn't try very hard to distinguish between civilians and fighters. So yeah, if what Netanyahu wanted had been to get the hostages released, he could have just kept doing that. But that was not high on his priority list.
Yeah, and then the other thing was that Israel was starting to, at least many people in Israel were starting to protest, saying, "Hey, wait a minute, the hostages. You're not focused on the hostages. Get the
Mhm.
hostages home."
Mhm.
And still he didn't do a deal. That's what really perplexes me. It's like,
Mm.
why does this guy get moved by public pressure?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's been a huge outcry by Israelis saying, just keep going with the ceasefire. Let's be done with this war. They don't like getting their soldiers killed. Um,
Right.
and but I mean, talk about being in a catch-22. This guy he's got no good options. If he gives in and continues a ceasefire, his government is going to topple. And if he doesn't, he's going to lose popularity with the people. And so he's got a terrible thing going. He's in a deal with the devil when he signed up those guys in order to get a government.
Well, I
Well,
think he has a very good. He could choose a very good deal. He could resign.
mhm. But then he's in prison, and we don't want that.
Oh yeah, he
He's
doesn't
an
want to. He
innocent
doesn't
guy.
want to stand take the reap the consequences of his own actions. It sounds like.
Right, right.
Right.
Sound like
So
anybody else you know?
right. So if he did lose power, he would do you think he would be convicted of these crimes that have been hanging over his head?
I mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
There's a lot of evidence against him, but who knows? He also
Right.
has his fingers in the judicial arm of the government, so anything is possible over there.
Right. Right.
So,
Okay. Well, the other question I was going towards that we got sidetracked was what's going on in the West Bank, during this time that we're all focused on Gaza. Um,
mhm,
and since October 7th, and then just the last almost a year and a half it's been, um, things have been happening in the West Bank. All along they've been happening in the West Bank, but
mhm,
where kind of most people haven't been focused on the West Bank. So
mhm.
maybe you could fill us in on what's been going on there.
Yeah, it's I mean, some analysts have been calling it a genocide in the West Bank,
Really?
or just as long as they've been saying Gaza is a genocide. It's genocide doesn't require that you kill every single person in a people group. It requires that you have the intention of doing great damage to that people group and making life impossible for them and things like that. And this is what is happening in the West Bank, and it's been happening in slow motion for decades. But ever since October 7th, with all eyes on Gaza, the Israeli military, as well as some of the radical settlers, have been just taking matters into their own hands in the West Bank, killing people. They've had airstrikes on some of the Palestinian cities in the West Bank. Um, Snipers running people over. They've had tanks that just run over people. They've been destroying the infrastructure. I mean, literally, I've seen photos from West Bank cities like Jenin, and you would swear you were looking at Gaza. It's just complete, nothing but rubble and mud.
No,
Um,
this, yeah, I had not been aware of that. I've heard of the
mm,
settlers, you know, being violent against Palestinians, but not airstrikes from Israel in the West Bank.
yep,
And
yep.
what are they claiming that, why are they doing that? What is their claim?
Well, what their claim is that there's a lot of resistance efforts, and there are groups of resistance fighters, which is true, especially in the refugee camps. So you've got tens of thousands of Palestinians living in these camps under horrific conditions, very crowded, a lot of poverty, and they've been there, most of them for their whole lives. They've been there since 1948, or in some cases 1967. They've been there for a long time, and they're miserable. And so the refugee camps especially are hotbeds of resistance. And well, we can't have resistance, even though resistance against occupation is legal under international law, but occupation is not. At
Right,
least
right, right.
long-term occupation is illegal under international law. So the guys that are conducting these resistance operations and making plans and things like that, they're kind of within their rights to do that. There's not a very specific point at which you can say, okay, now it's illegal. But at least some of the international law commentators have said that the right to resist occupation includes the right to bear arms, armed conflict. Um, but Israel, again, just like with Gaza, there's a different answer other than just using firepower. If there's an occupation going on and people are resisting the occupation, you got to end the occupation. And that's the same thing has been going on in Gaza as well as the West Bank. The occupation has to end when the people have equality, when they have justice. They are not going to resist. There won't be anything to resist. So
Right, right.
Israel
So
just coming after everybody who they're mad at and wiping them out, it's not accomplishing anything except making more people more angry.
right. Yeah, so a lot of people don't realize that there's an apartheid-like system in the West Bank,
Mm,
and so there's it is an occupation. There's no freedom of movement.
right.
Israeli settlers are continuing to come in and take land
Mm,
and basically displace Palestinians.
yeah.
Um, and uh, so the question on the refugee camps maybe would be, um, after all these years, why couldn't they get established in homes outside a refugee camp?
So that's a complicated question. For one thing, when you're living in a refugee camp, you're living for free. Not everybody is able to save up enough money to move out and suddenly have a mortgage or pay rent on an apartment or something like that. Um, Especially the rate of unemployment in the West Bank is very high, and the cost of living is high, and just the stability of living in the West Bank is really problematic because
Mhm.
under the occupation, there is no guarantee of anything. You could have your job one day and the next day it's gone, or you're not allowed to cross this checkpoint. There's 900 checkpoints in the West Bank right now, and the
Wow.
West Bank isn't that big.
Yeah, it's
Um,
not right.
so a person could live 10 minutes away from their work, but it takes them 8 hours to get there, and then they get fired,
Yeah.
um, or something like that. So that's part of the answer. And another part is just um, why would we settle for the status quo? I think there are some people who would say, I'm in the refugee camp because I'm waiting to go back home to where I came from, and give me justice and let me go back to my real
And
home.
their real home would be somewhere in Israel, within Israel's
It could
boundaries?
be in Israel, it could be somewhere else
Yeah.
in, the West Bank, somewhere that they were pushed out of for one reason or another.
So, I mean, that kind of begs the question. I mean, Israel supporters are always saying you can be a Palestinian and an Israeli citizen. Yeah, we treat everyone equally. So why don't they let those people go back to where they used to live
Mhm.
in within the boundaries of Israel?
Yeah, so they don't actually treat them equally. There's this myth out there that Palestinians living in Israel live in equality, and I think, the way they describe it, that there is an Arab on the Supreme Court of Israel, therefore, there's
Right.
equality.
Right. Yeah. Right.
It's like the token Palestinian, and by the way, they're not Arabs, they're Palestinians.
Yeah.
Um, so there is nothing like equality inside Israel. I mean, even the Israelis of color don't enjoy equality with the white European Israelis.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. There's all kinds of racism going on there, not just against Palestinians. So, yeah, that's a myth that there's equality inside Israel, but they're not. I mean, the people in the refugee camps would never be allowed to go and live in Israel. You just
So
can't
they,
do
yeah, so they just wouldn't be allowed to go.
it.
And it
Mhm,
sounds like with unemployment high, um, they must be getting some food aid from agencies, I would imagine. But with
mhm.
unemployment high, it's just hard to get a job and get out of the camp. Um, and there's no stability in employment, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, and then plus the fact that some people feel principled to think, hey, I used to live way over there. I don't I don't want to leave until I can go back home. Right.
Right.
That kind
Right.
of
And this
attitude.
is yeah, this is also what they're saying in Gaza is, "You wanna send me where?
Yeah.
I My hometown is
Right.
2 miles from here. It's just on the other side of the border."
Yeah.
Our
Right.
family has been saying that, they their town is Iblis, and
Oh, it's it on Israel's side of the
it's
border.
it's
Yeah.
inside Israel.
Yeah.
Um, I and our family, we've been there. I think I've been there 4 times. Some of my kids have been there a few times. It is today, it's a almond grove. There's just a bunch of almond trees
Hmm.
and some irrigation. Used to be a They used to grow watermelons there, but there's nobody there. In fact, there is a well-known Palestinian British guy. His name is Salman. Oof, I forgot his last name. Abu something.
Hmm.
He is he's a historian and a scholar, and he has basically created a plan for all Palestinians that want to go back home, because as he says, there's lots of space. It's not like Israel is crowded with Israelis.
Oh, really?
The village that our
Hmm.
family came from, um, like I said, they destroyed it, and now it's just farmland, and nobody's really taking much care of it, and there are lots of towns like that are just empty land now. And so it would be not that hard, for Palestinians to return if they could.
Well,
S
yeah, that
Abu
begs so many other questions. Why
Mm,
not? I mean, that you claim that Palestinians are equal citizens.
mhm.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, they his name is Salman Abu Sitta, that's his name.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so there's a very important phrase in Israeli society, and that is demographic threat. And, the idea of having more Palestinians than
Hmm.
Israelis very problematic.
Oh, I see.
So
That's
they're
very
always watching the population statistics, and Palestinians love to have big families, and
okay.
Israelis, a lot of them like to have small families.
I
So
see.
it's been like this for many
What
years.
what is the percentage of Palestinians that are Israeli citizens and within the boundaries of Israel? Do you know?
Yeah, it's about 20%.
Okay, 20%. Right. Okay.
Mhm.
So they don't want it to be any larger than that, apparently.
Yeah, they're watching it very closely. So
I see.
there is no way you could let a whole bunch of
So
Palestinians come back.
this gentleman that you're talking about, his proposals are not being taken seriously, it sounds like, huh?
Well, I mean, he's been writing about this for many years. He's an old guy now. Um, and he's been writing about it and trying to encourage, people to take it seriously, but there's such a grip on the media in the West. Most people have never heard of him, but he's very famous within the Palestinian circles. Uh,
Right.
but it's very hard to get something that, what do you want to call it? Edgy to
Yeah.
get to take hold.
Right. Yeah. To most people, this is a radical idea. But when
Mhm.
you unpack it, it's not radical at all. It's
Right.
common sense.
Yeah. Yep. Unless you have a demographic threat
Unless you
concept.
make up a demographic threat. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Okay. Back to the West Bank. Tell us, is the settler uh, Israeli settler influx and violence become worse lately? What's been going on there?
I mean, it's always been a problem, but
Mhm.
especially since October 7th, it
Mhm.
it has been getting steadily worse. And
Mhm.
there's just a lot of these radical settlers who think they are doing God's thing and occupying the land that God gave them. For some of them, there is no limit to what they'll do in order to get rid of Palestinians on this land that they want and to take over the land. So I mean, there are guys they'll come in overnight under cover of darkness and they'll move in a little mobile home and a couple of sheep, and then they'll put up a fence around a big area of grazing land and they'll say, okay, this is now a settlement. This is mine.
Yeah, but whose land is that? Where are they getting this land that they're moving
It's
into?
Palestinians' land, either
Okay.
Palestinian owned, like private citizens, or
Right.
part of Palestine public land.
I see. Okay.
Mhm.
I see. And so then what happens after that? I mean, they set up their little temporary thing, and then what happens?
Mhm. Yeah, so they'll bring in a tree. This is another
Yeah.
big one. They bring in a tree that's in a pot and
Right.
say, "See, I have roots here." And so the Israeli government has authority over the West Bank in
Mhm.
one way or another. The entire West Bank they're controlling. So the Palestinians would go to the Israeli police and say, "Hey, this settler is taking my land," and the Israeli police is like, "Shut up and let him just get out of the way," or
Yeah.
"Oh, okay, we'll come and fix that for you," but they never show up. And
Right. So there's no rights. They don't enforce anyone's rights
no,
for land and possessions.
right.
So, but do these settlers, is that a fairly common way of them coming in, and then they end up building a house or a development after that?
Yeah, the Israeli government also, I mean, on a bigger scale, the Israeli government will approve of 1,000 housing units to be added onto an existing settlement, for example. And the existing settlement has to be expanded. So they'll take over more of the Palestinians' land that's around the settlement. And the whole
Oh,
settlement originally was Palestinian land anyway.
right. Yeah.
They just keep
So
growing
they
and
just allow
growing.
development is basically what you're saying.
Is what?
Israel allows development.
They encourage it.
And
They
they encourage it,
subsidize it.
and they subsidize it.
Right.
Right. So this is basically, going in and stealing land, by the way, which was supposed to be, um, officially given back to the Palestinians right after the last war in that area, according to
Hmm.
the negotiated peace. Is that
Right.
correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's there's about 700,000
Mhm.
settlers living illegally in the West Bank, and they have all the
700,
rights
no.
of Israeli citizens, but they
Right.
don't live in Israel.
Right. Okay.
So,
And so, yeah, so what you're saying is that's been going on for years, but it's gotten worse after October 7th. It's still
mhm.
going on. And it's another thing that we just don't pay attention to, even though, correct me if I'm wrong, the U.S. has officially opposed settlements over many different administrations, but
Right.
nothing ever changes.
Right. Nothing ever actually changes. Yeah.
Right, actually changes. Yeah, it's incredible.
And
Um,
and just as a PS on the West Bank, since October 7th, almost 1,000 Palestinians have been killed, mostly by the Israeli military, but also some by settlers as well.
in the West Bank.
In the West Bank, yeah.
Okay. So people, I mean, people have been killed by settlers, you mean, or by Israel airstrikes as well?
Mostly by the Israeli military.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. But sometimes settler violence is there
Right.
too. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And there
Yeah.
have been some Palestinians that have attacked. Um, full disclosure, Palestinians are not angels. There have been some Palestinians who have
Mhm.
attacked or
Mhm.
rammed their cars and things like that, but
Mhm.
it's pretty small. I wish I could say the number off the top of my head, but I don't remember. But a few dozen Israelis have been killed by Palestinians.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's when something like that happens, all we hear about is the Palestinian violence. We don't hear about the Israeli violence or the
Right.
settler violence.
Mhm.
Or
That's
the
right.
IDF violence, and
Yep.
except it's in the end couched in terms of, well, there was a threat and we had to take it out. So yeah,
Mhm.
okay. So now that the Trump administration is in, and we're hearing all these crazy ideas from Trump. The ceasefire is, we don't know what's going to happen. It sounds like Netanyahu is trying to back out of it in a sneaky way, I would say.
Mhm.
And what do you think is going to happen? And do you have any sense, given the history of how these things go, and with someone like Trump in the administration and Netanyahu still in power, how do you think things are going to go in the next month, 6 months, or whatever?
Boy, yeah, I could never take a guess on that, but my husband has
And
made
yeah,
some comments about it,
yeah,
and I think he's got a lot of perspective. Obviously, there's never been anyone quite like, Trump in
hmm,
office that we could predict what's gonna come out of his mouth or anything. And Netanyahu is in such a corner that anything is possible from him too. But my husband thinks that it's very possible that they're going to accomplish an ethnic cleansing in Gaza, and that
oh
they're
wow,
going to force the majority of Gazans out, probably through Egypt. They might get sort of stuck in the Sinai Peninsula in the desert or something like that. Um, and then dispersed from there. I don't know exactly to where, but
and how many people are we talking about? This is 2 million people, right?
yeah, it's 2 million people.
Right. So, and I think a lot of times people don't realize that, oh, well, yeah, they shouldn't be there. So why don't these Arab countries step up and receive all these people? They're supposed to be brothers. It was like,
Mhm.
well, it's not really an apples to apples comparison. These people are
Right.
still being driven out of their homes illegally
Mhm.
with violence.
Mhm.
And the other side of it is that it's very expensive to take in 2 million people somewhere. You don't just,
Mhm.
and then how are you going to integrate them into your own country? And, and we're up in arms in our country because of all these immigrants. And
Right.
you expect some other country just to take 2 million immigrants just like that.
Right. Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, we're saying, "Oh, they're taking all of our jobs." Well, actually, the immigrants that are coming from Mexico are not taking our jobs. They're taking the jobs that we don't want. But in the case of the Palestinians going into, let's say, Jordan or Egypt or any of the Arab countries, Palestinians are some of the most educated people in the world. They are highly educated and very intelligent. And if they're going to go into a country, they're going to be very well qualified for just about any job that's there. And so that's a problem for the locals. That's a problem for the Jordanians.
Right. So they literally would take jobs.
They
So
would, yeah.
right. And so they're very highly educated because there's several universities in Gaza and the West Bank, or, how did they get
Mhm.
educated under these conditions?
There's excellent education in Gaza and in the West Bank. Really, especially Gaza. Superb education.
And it's funded by who?
Um, I mean, there's funding from all over the world for a lot of that, and it's free or very inexpensive for people to go. My niece, that I've talked about in my blog, is this close to getting her master's degree in Arabic literature, I think. And like she already had her cap and gown, and she just had to finish her capstone project. And then the war started. And now she doesn't know if she's ever going to graduate. But where was I going with that? Oh, yeah. So, as my husband explained it to me once, he said his mom told him, "Look, we're Palestinian. There's no guarantee that we're going to have land, that we're going to have anything that we can count on in our future. Education is the only thing that we can take with us wherever we go." So they're really big on education, even at great cost, whatever it takes. Like my husband, his parents scraped together enough money to send him to the U.S. for his master's degree, um, and they sacrificed everything they had in order to get him a top-notch education so that he would be able to be successful no matter what. Um,
So are there also colleges in Gaza?
yeah, great
Yeah.
universities.
And
Yeah,
these are I'm sorry, who's funding these and who's
there's funding from all over the world. I think
okay.
uh, probably some of the Arab countries and Islamic organizations are funding a lot of that, um,
Okay.
to make sure that, but it's top-notch education.
Yeah, so we have colleges within the country, we have people going overseas, we have, I suppose, on a lot of online training happening.
Mhm. Mhm.
So education is big, and so that just plays into, okay, um, this is kind of the only way for people to have hope is to get
Yeah,
educated and
yeah.
possibly one day have a better life.
Mhm.
Um, but then again, if they leave the country, they take a chance of not returning. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. Uh, so there seems to be maybe, okay, maybe it's really going to happen that they are driven out by the Trump administration or by Netanyahu. Isn't that what Netanyahu really wanted all along? Is to drive
Yeah.
them out?
Yeah, I think, he was secretly in talks with a couple of African countries early on. I remember, I think it was the Congo. They were gonna
Yeah.
send people to there or to, some other places that were just in terrible shape themselves, like, you don't
Right,
wanna
right,
go there. Uh,
right. Yeah.
so yeah, so when the US got on board with something like that, that's very exciting for him, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
it's exciting for him. Yeah, right. With the gold statues, right?
Mm,
Okay. So, all right, we're running out of time, but just one more question. I know this is, I mean, I've been getting to know what's going on there. You just wonder, what is the solution to this? Is there ever going to be a solution? And the two-state solution, still a lot of people promote that. If only you could get people like the U.S. and Israel to agree. Well, the U.S. supposedly on paper agrees to it, but if only you could get the Israel to agree to it, and actually, get some of these hardliners out of power.
Mhm.
Uh, that's one solution, and then other people like Miko Peled basically is saying, you know what, that's not going to work because like you said, what did you say? There was hundreds of thousands of Israel settlers in the West Bank,
Mhm.
right? They're not going to just up and leave, right? And
Mhm.
you would end up having to drive them out, which would not be popular or right to do, even
Yeah.
in that situation, maybe. So maybe the better solution is to have a real democracy in the area and just make it all Israel, Palestine, Israel, Israel, Palestine.
Mhm.
Is
Yeah.
that even possible? Is that even fathomable? I mean,
Yeah, well, October 7th, and everything that has happened since then have really just muddied the water so much. So in my mind, and I think a lot of Palestinians' minds, how could we trust Israelis to
right.
share a country with us? And
Yeah.
I'm sure Israelis are thinking exactly the same thing,
Yes. Right. Right.
and that's understandable. Um, uh But a two-state solution, it's not like there's a one-state solution and there's a two-state solution. The two-state solution has a lot of variables, and one of the things that I understand about the two-state solution, having read, a bunch of documents, official documents on it, is in a two-state solution, as things stand, the Palestinian state would not be allowed to have a military.
Okay.
They would not be allowed to have any weapons.
Hmm.
Israel would control all of the borders. So basically, it would be sort of an occupation without the name, and it would be permanent. And to be Palestinian inside of a little place without any way of defending yourself, and Israel is on the outside, and
Hmm.
they want all of the land, that would be really, really vulnerable place to be.
Right. So it may not be as good of a solution as it sounds because there wouldn't be equality, real equality.
It's not that
Too
simple, yeah.
many conditions against the Palestinians, it sounds like.
Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm. So,
I
you
see.
know, somebody said, after October 7th happened and all of these tens of thousands were killed, they're like, well, what was Israel supposed to do after October 7th? Like,
Right. Yeah.
obviously, we have to do this. But what they could have done after October 7th is wake up and realize that what they are putting Palestinians through is unsustainable. And they
Right.
could have just said, okay, we should have done this before October 7th, but we're doing it now. Take away the occupation, stop the blockade, allow these people to live their own lives, comfortably, and to prosper. And, same with the West Bank. That's the
Yeah.
solution,
Right.
is whether it's one state or two states, the people need to have equality and they need to have justice. So how that happens, maybe we need to come up with something brand new, something
Yeah.
completely.
Right. So really, that is the solution: justice and ending the occupation and ending the reason why there's resistance from
Yeah,
Palestinians.
exactly,
Right. Whether we can condemn the violent resistance for sure, but the resistance is there because of something unjust happening
right,
to the Palestinians, and a violent injustice as well.
right. And I just want to push back on you for a second, Michael, on denouncing the violence.
Hmm.
What's been happening to Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza for 76 years has been violence. If we want to condemn Palestinian violence, we have to condemn Israeli violence too. I can't.
Oh,
I'm past
absolutely. I
this
totally
place.
agree with you. I've
I'm
been saying
past
that
this
for
place
months.
where, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
past this place
it,
where I'm going to
you know,
say,
yeah,
I
right,
denounce Hamas for what they did on October 7th. I'm not going to say that until
yeah.
somebody else says, I denounce Israel for what they've been doing since
Yeah,
1940.
well, if you're going to call a war crime out, then call it out fairly on everywhere you see it,
Right,
and
right.
call it out in Israel. Israel is committing a war crime in Gaza, and exponentially greater. You can make the case,
Yeah. Yep. Unless you don't think Palestinians are human beings,
right?
which
And
is
right, yeah,
this is one of the things that I think Trump is guilty of. Biden
yeah,
was also guilty. I mean,
hmm
when Trump is saying things like, well, you saw those hostages come out of Gaza and they looked hungry. They were emaciated, but he doesn't care that thousands of Palestinians are even hungrier and more emaciated and have been through torture. Then you're
right,
not thinking about Palestinians,
right.
not human beings. They don't get your consideration. This is a big, big problem that a lot of us don't even see Palestinians as human beings.
Yeah, that's true. And they equate all of them the same as Hamas too, as well, right?
And Hamas, again, is just a resistance group,
Right?
and resistance is legal. So
Yes. Right.
we just have it in our minds that they are a terrorist organization and
Right.
they're terrible and they're evil and they're
And
bloodthirsty. Huh.
and also some of the purported violence that they've supposedly done have been proven to be not true. You know, the
Right.
beheading of babies, and
Yep.
I believe the rape charges were never substantiated, right?
No one has ever come forward. There have been no victims of rape found. And
Right.
they're not just saying that it was rape, they're saying it was mass rape. And
Yeah. Right.
there's
Yeah.
nothing to prove. And also, of the 1,100 or so people that were killed on October 7th,
Mhm.
a lot of them were killed by
Yes.
Israeli airstrikes. And that has been proven again and again.
Yeah, and but
And
no one
boy,
seems to accept it.
no, well, they're
Every
not,
time you
they're
say
not
that, you
publicizing it very well
yeah,
over
they're
here.
not right. It should, yeah. Some of those people, it's obvious that some of the damage done, Hamas doesn't have the weapons for that. In other words,
Right.
it had to
Right.
have been Israel strikes that
Yeah.
did some of that damage, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Kathy, for filling us in on this very complex and disturbing topic, and that's very personal for you. And it must be really hard to continue to talk about this all over and over again and still have
Mm.
your family members suffering like that. So we appreciate you coming on board. And folks, we'll put some things in the show notes, some resources and sources. Thanks for coming on again.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
All right. Okay, folks, until next time, enjoy responsibly.